October 2022. That's when their world shattered. That's when 3 innocent children vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mother whose heart would break a little more with each passing day. For 2 long years, she searched. For 2 long years, she refused to give up hope. And in late August, when that phone call finally came, when authorities told her they had found her babies alive, she could barely breathe through the tears. But this isn't just a story about a happy ending. This is a story about darkness hidden in plain sight, about a sinister web of deception that stretched across state lines, about family members who looked a grieving mother in the eye and lied. This is a story about 3 children who were intentionally erased from the world, hidden away where no one could find them, all in the name of something their captors called faith. Let's go back to the beginning. Picture a mother, any mother, going about her daily routine, making breakfast, getting the kids ready, the normal chaos of family life. Now imagine that routine suddenly stopping. Imagine the silence that follows when your children don't come home. Imagine calling their names and hearing nothing but your own echo. That's where this story begins. In that terrible, suffocating silence, the children disappeared in October of 2022. 3 young souls, their names withheld to protect their privacy, simply vanished. There were no clear signs of struggle, no obvious clues left behind. One day they were there, and the next, they were gone. Their mother reported them missing immediately, her voice shaking as she gave descriptions to the police, her hands trembling as she provided recent photographs. She knew something was terribly wrong. A mother knows. The initial investigation yielded frustratingly little. Friends and neighbors were interviewed. School records were examined. Social media accounts were scrutinized, but there was nothing, no digital footprint, no trail to follow. It was as if the children had been swallowed by the earth itself. The mother's anguish grew with each dead end, each false lead, each night that passed without her children safely in their beds. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The media coverage that had initially surrounded the case began to fade. Other stories took precedence, but the mother never stopped searching. She printed flyers and posted them on every street corner, in every store window that would accept them. She contacted psychics and private investigators. She joined support groups for parents of missing children, sharing her story, hoping someone, somewhere, might have seen something. Behind the scenes, however, something darker was unfolding. While the mother searched desperately for her children, while police departments across multiple states coordinated their efforts, while America's missing children databases were updated with 3 new faces, those children were being deliberately hidden, not by strangers, not by random kidnappers, but by their own family members. The grandmother, a woman who should have been helping to search, who should have been comforting a devastated daughter, was instead concealing the children's whereabouts. The aunt, who should have been making phone calls and organizing search parties, was actively participating in their disappearance. And the father, the man who had helped bring these children into the world, had taken them and run. For 22 months, this deception continued. 22 months of lies, of misdirection, of a mother's heart slowly breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. 22 months during which those 3 children were living in a remote area on the border between Arizona and Utah, far from anyone who might recognize them, far from the life they had known. The town of Fredonia, Arizona, sits in a peculiar location. It's part of what locals call the Arizona Strip, a section of land geographically isolated from the rest of Arizona by the Grand Canyon. To get there from most of the state, you have to drive through either Nevada or Utah. It's a small place with a population of just over 1,000 people. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. The kind of place where secrets can hide in plain sight, protected by a collective wall of silence. It was here, in this isolated corner of America, that the children were kept, living with their grandmother. They were hidden from the world, prevented from attending school under normal circumstances, kept away from situations where someone might ask questions. The logistics of such concealment are staggering when you think about them. No enrollment in public schools that would require identification and previous records. No visits to doctors that might have computer systems linked to insurance databases. No chance encounters with people who might have seen their faces on missing children posters. The grandmother and the aunt, authorities would later discover, had help. This wasn't a crime committed in isolation. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple people who all agreed that hiding these children from their mother was somehow the right thing to do. The question that haunted investigators, the question that would eventually lead them to a disturbing answer, was simple. Why? What could possibly motivate family members to tear children away from their mother and hide them for nearly 2 years? What belief system, what ideology could justify such cruelty? The answer, when it finally emerged, was chilling in its implications. The Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. To those unfamiliar with the organization, the name might sound innocuous enough, perhaps even respectable, but this is not the mainstream Mormon church. This is something else entirely. The FLDS, as it's commonly known, is a fundamentalist offshoot that has been the subject of numerous criminal investigations over the years. It's a group that believes in practices rejected by mainstream society, including plural marriage and absolute obedience to their prophet. The church had gained notoriety years earlier when its leader, Warren Jeffs, was convicted of being an accomplice to rape and sentenced to life in prison for assaulting underage girls he claimed as his spiritual wives. Even from behind bars, Jeffs continued to exert control over his followers, issuing directives and maintaining his iron grip on the community. Under his leadership and that of his predecessors, the FLDS had created insular communities where the outside world was viewed with suspicion and fear, where members were taught that their survival, both physical and spiritual, depended on their separation from mainstream society. These communities existed in several locations, but the area around Fredonia and the neighboring Utah town of Hilldale had long been known as FLDS territory. Here, the church wasn't just a religious organization. It was the governing force that controlled nearly every aspect of daily life. Children were educated in church-run schools that taught their own version of history and values. Marriages were arranged by church leaders. Employment, housing, even access to basic utilities could be controlled by those in power. The FLDS had accumulated a disturbing record of allegations over the years: human trafficking, sexual abuse, child marriage, the systematic control of women and children. Former members who had escaped spoke of a culture of fear and manipulation, where questioning authority was tantamount to rejecting God himself. They described a world where children were taught that their mothers were sinful if they didn't obey the prophet, where families could be torn apart and reassigned at a leader's whim. And it was into this world, investigators believed, that the 3 missing children had been taken, whether they were hidden there because the family members were themselves FLDS members, or because they knew the community would provide a safe haven from outside authorities, remains unclear. What became clear during the investigation was that the children had been intentionally kept away from any contact with the outside world that might reveal their location. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of coming to light. Sometimes it's through investigation, through the patient work of detectives following leads and connecting dots. Sometimes it's through forensic evidence or technological breakthroughs. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's because someone's conscience can no longer bear the weight of their silence. Late August. The call came into the police department. Another tip among hundreds they had received over the months. But this one was different. This one had details, specific information about 3 children living in Fredonia with their grandmother. The tipster had seen them, had heard things, had pieced together enough to realize these might be the missing children whose faces had been circulated far and wide. The identity of this person remains protected, but their decision to speak up would prove to be the key that finally unlocked this case. The Fredonia Police Department received the information and immediately began to move. They couldn't just rush in. These situations require careful planning. If the children were indeed there, they needed to ensure their safety during any intervention. If the family members suspected that authorities were closing in, there was a risk they might flee again. taking the children even deeper into hiding. The police had one chance to get this right. Officers coordinated with Child Protective Services. They reviewed the case file from the initial disappearance. They verified the information from the tip as best they could without alerting those involved. And then, when everything was in place, they acted. The moment of arrival must have been chaotic. Police vehicles pulling up to the residence, officers approaching with both urgency and caution. The grandmother realizing that the secret she had kept for nearly 2 years was finally being exposed. Did she try to deny the children were there? Did she attempt to justify her actions? Did she show any remorse for what she had put their mother through? The official reports don't say, but what they do confirm is that the children were there, alive, and that they were immediately taken into protective custody. 3 children who had been missing for almost 2 years were suddenly found. But in what condition? What had those months of hiding done to them psychologically? Had they been told their mother didn't want them? Had they been indoctrinated with beliefs that would make their transition back to normal life difficult? Had they been harmed in any way? Physically or emotionally? These were the questions that medical and psychological professionals would need to carefully explore in the days and weeks to come. The grandmother was arrested on the spot. So was the aunt. Both women were charged in connection with the 2022 disappearance, facing serious legal consequences for their role in keeping the children hidden. The charges would likely include custodial interference at a minimum, possibly kidnapping depending on how prosecutors chose to proceed. Each charge could carry significant prison time, especially given the duration of the offense and the deliberate nature of the concealment. But there was still one person missing from this accounting of justice: the father. While the grandmother and aunt were in custody, he remained at large, somewhere out there, possibly still within FLDS communities that might shelter him, possibly having fled to Mexico or Canada, possibly hiding in plain sight under an assumed identity. An arrest warrant was issued, and his name was added to fugitive databases. But as of the time these children were found, he had successfully evaded capture. The reunion between the mother and her children must have been overwhelming. Imagine seeing the faces you've thought about every single day for 2 years. Imagine holding the children you feared you might never see again. Imagine the tears, the disbelief, the joy mixed with the trauma of all those lost months. According to reports, the children were indeed returned to their mother. But that reunion was just the beginning of a long journey toward healing. Because these children had been through something extraordinary and traumatic. They had been separated from their mother for a significant portion of their young lives. They had been living in an environment that was likely very different from the one they had known before. They may have been told things about their mother, about the outside world, that would need to be gently corrected. They would need therapy, patience, and time to process what had happened to them. And the mother herself would need support. The trauma of having your children taken from you doesn't simply disappear the moment they're returned. There would be nightmares about losing them again. There would be anger at the family members who had betrayed her trust so completely. There would be the challenge of helping her children readjust while dealing with her own complex emotions. The scars left by those 22 months would take years to heal, if they ever fully healed at all. The investigation that followed the children's recovery revealed the extent of the conspiracy to hide them. The Fredonia Police Department, working with other agencies, began to piece together exactly how the concealment had been maintained for so long. They discovered that multiple people had known where the children were, but had chosen to remain silent. They found evidence of planning and coordination, of deliberate steps taken to ensure the children wouldn't be found. What the investigation also revealed was troubling information about the FLDS connection. While not all details have been made public, authorities indicated they believed the children had been within the sphere of influence of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This raised serious concerns about what they might have been exposed to during their time in hiding. The FLDS has a documented history of serious abuses. Beyond Warren Jeff's own convictions for child sexual assault, the church has faced allegations of running what amounts to a child trafficking operation, arranging marriages between adult men and underage girls, systematically denying education to children to keep them dependent on the church, and using fear and intimidation to prevent members from leaving or speaking to authorities. Former FLDS members have described a world where children have no autonomy, where girls as young as 12 or 13 are sealed to men old enough to be their grandfathers, where boys who are seen as competition for the limited number of young brides are cast out of the community and left to fend for themselves on the streets. They've described a culture where reporting abuse to outside authorities is seen as a betrayal punishable by eternal damnation, where women and children are taught that their only value lies in their obedience to male priesthood holders. Were these 3 children subjected to this environment? Were they being groomed for future arranged marriages? Were they being taught that their mother was an enemy of God? The full truth of what happened during those 22 months may never be entirely known, especially if the children were too young to fully understand or articulate their experiences. But the fact that authorities suspected an FLDS connection suggests they had reason to believe the children were at serious risk beyond simple custodial interference. The legal proceedings against the grandmother and aunt would unfold in the months following the children's recovery. Defense attorneys would likely argue that the defendants believed they were acting in the children's best interests, that they had concerns about the mother's fitness or safety. Prosecutors would counter with the simple fact that regardless of any concerns, the proper recourse was through the legal system, through family courts and child protective services, not through kidnapping and concealment. The case would also raise broader questions about the FLDS and similar organizations. How do communities like this continue to exist and operate in modern America? How do they evade oversight from child protective services and law enforcement? Part of the answer lies in their isolation, both geographic and social. By concentrating in remote areas and maintaining a culture of secrecy and distrust toward outsiders, they create environments where abuse can flourish unchecked. Another part of the answer lies in the complexity of balancing religious freedom with the protection of vulnerable individuals. Law enforcement and social services must navigate the fine line between respecting First Amendment rights and intervening when those rights are being used as a shield for criminal activity. Critics argue that authorities have been too hesitant to act against groups like the FLDS out of fear of being accused of religious persecution, allowing abuses to continue far longer than they should. But there's also a resource issue. These communities often span multiple jurisdictions, making coordination difficult. They're in rural areas where law enforcement agencies are small and already stretched thin. Investigating closed religious communities requires specialized knowledge and significant time and resources that many departments simply don't have. And victims within these communities are often unwilling to cooperate with investigations, having been conditioned from birth to view outside authorities as enemies. The case of these 3 children represents both a success and a failure of the system. It's a success in that they were ultimately found alive and returned to their mother. The persistence of investigators, the courage of whoever called in that tip, and the coordination between multiple agencies resulted in these children being rescued from a potentially dangerous situation. That's something to celebrate, but it's also a failure in that it took nearly 2 years to find them. 2 years during which a mother suffered unimaginable anguish. 2 years during which these children were kept from their home and potentially exposed to harmful influences. 2 years during which family members were able to successfully conceal their whereabouts despite active investigations. How many other children might be hidden in similar circumstances? How many other families are enduring this nightmare right now, wondering if they'll ever see their loved ones again? The statistics on missing children in America are sobering. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, hundreds of thousands of children are reported missing each year. While the vast majority of these cases are resolved quickly, many involving custody disputes or runaways who return home, there are still thousands of children whose whereabouts remain unknown for extended periods. Each one of those cases represents a family in crisis, a child in potential danger, and a community grappling with fear and uncertainty. Family abduction cases, like this one appears to be, account for a significant portion of longer-term missing children cases. These are situations where a parent, grandparent, or other relative takes a child in violation of a custody agreement or court order. While sometimes motivated by genuine concerns about the child's welfare, often these abductions are about control, revenge, or religious or ideological beliefs that the abductor places above the law. What makes family abduction cases particularly difficult is that the child is with someone they know, someone they may trust and love. They may not realize they've been taken wrongfully. They may resist rescue efforts if they've been told that the searching parent is dangerous or doesn't want them. The psychological impact of being turned against a parent, of being taught to fear the person who loves you most, can be devastating and long-lasting. For this mother, getting her children back was just the first step in a long process of rebuilding their family. There would be difficult conversations ahead, age-appropriate explanations of what had happened and why. There would be the task of re-establishing routines and trust. There would be the challenge of helping the children reconnect with extended family members who hadn't been involved in the abduction, while keeping them safe from those who had been. There would also be practical considerations. Were the children enrolled in school under false names during their time in hiding? Did they receive proper medical care? Are they up to date on vaccinations? Do they need additional educational support to catch up if their schooling was interrupted or inadequate? All of these questions would need to be addressed as the family worked to rebuild their life. And hanging over everything would be the knowledge that the father was still out there somewhere, as long as he remained at large. There would be a fear that he might try to take the children again. Security measures would need to be put in place. The children might need to be cautious about their routines, about where they could go and with whom. The mother would have to balance giving her children a normal life with protecting them from a very real threat. The hunt for the fugitive father would continue, involving multiple law enforcement agencies and possibly even international cooperation if there was reason to believe he had fled the country. Investigators would monitor any FLDS communities where he might seek refuge. They would track financial records, looking for transactions that might reveal his location. They would interview anyone who might have information about his whereabouts, applying pressure on those who might be helping him hide. But finding someone who has gone to ground within a closed religious community is extraordinarily difficult. These groups protect their own, viewing law enforcement as persecutors rather than protectors. They have networks of safe houses, methods of moving people around without leaving paper trails, and a collective commitment to helping members evade what they see as unjust laws. Unless someone within the community decides to cooperate, or unless the fugitive makes a mistake that reveals his location, he could remain hidden indefinitely. The case also raises questions about accountability for religious organizations that harbor criminals or facilitate abuses. Can organizations like the FLDS be held legally responsible when their members commit crimes in the name of faith? Can communities that systematically shield abusers from prosecution face consequences as entities rather than just as individual members? These are complex legal and constitutional questions that courts and legislators continue to grapple with. There's a tension in American law between protecting religious freedom and preventing harm. The First Amendment provides broad protections for religious practice, and for good reason. Religious persecution has been a source of tremendous suffering throughout human history, and the founders of the United States were keenly aware of this when they drafted the Bill of Rights. But those protections were never intended to create zones where criminal law doesn't apply, where children can be abused, where people can be trafficked, all under the guise of religious practice. The challenge is determining where to draw the line. Mainstream religious practices that might seem unusual to outsiders, arranged marriages between consenting adults, communal living arrangements, homeschooling. These are all legally protected activities. But when does an arranged marriage become forced marriage? When does homeschooling become educational neglect? When does isolation from the broader community become unlawful confinement? These aren't always easy questions to answer, especially when those involved sincerely believe they're following divine commandments. What isn't ambiguous is the law regarding child abduction and concealment, regardless of religious belief. Taking children from their legal guardian and hiding them from authorities is a crime. The grandmother and aunt in this case couldn't claim religious exemption from kidnapping laws. Their faith, whatever form it took, didn't give them the right to keep these children from their mother for nearly 2 years. The law on this point is clear, even if the motivations behind the crime were complex. As this case moved through the legal system, It would likely become part of a larger conversation about how to better protect children in insular religious communities. Child advocates have long argued for stronger oversight, for mandatory reporting requirements that apply regardless of religious affiliation, for more resources dedicated to investigating allegations of abuse in closed communities. They point to cases like this one as evidence that current protections are insufficient. On the other side are those who worry about government overreach, about the potential for religious discrimination, about the rights of parents and religious communities to raise children according to their beliefs without state interference. They argue that isolated incidents shouldn't be used to justify broad infringements on religious liberty, that most members of groups like the FLDS are law-abiding people who simply want to practice their faith in peace. Finding the right balance is crucial. Children have a right to safety, to education, to freedom from abuse and exploitation. But families also have a right to pass on their values and beliefs to the next generation, to organize their lives according to their conscience, to be free from unnecessary government intrusion. The question is, how to protect the former without unduly restricting the latter. For the three children at the center of this story, these broader debates about religious freedom and government oversight were probably far from their minds. They were likely just trying to make sense of their world, to understand why they had been taken from their mother, why they had lived where they lived for those months, and what their life would look like going forward. They were dealing with the immediate, personal impact of decisions made by adults who claim to be acting in their best interests. Child psychologists who work with victims of parental abduction describe a range of potential impacts. Some children adapt relatively quickly once reunited with their custodial parent, especially if they were young enough that their memories of the abduction period fade with time. Others struggle with attachment issues, trust problems, anxiety, and behavioral difficulties that can persist for years. Much depends on how the child was treated during their time away, what they were told, and how the reunion and recovery process is handled. In cases involving potential FLDS influence, there are additional concerns about religious indoctrination that may have occurred. Children may have been taught to fear the outside world, to view their mother or certain family members as evil or sinful, to believe that only complete obedience to religious authorities can save them. Undoing this kind of psychological manipulation requires patience, professional support, and a lot of love and reassurance. The mother in this case would need to be prepared for the possibility that her children might not immediately run into her arms and resume their previous relationship. They might be confused, conflicted, even resentful at being taken away from the grandmother they had been living with, especially if they had been told their mother had abandoned them or was dangerous. Building back that trust and connection would take time, consistency, and probably professional therapeutic support, but there would also be moments of joy and reconnection. Familiar songs that the children would suddenly remember. Inside jokes that would come flooding back. The comfort of a mother's embrace that no amount of time or distance could completely erase from muscle memory. These small victories, these gradual steps back toward normalcy, would be what sustained the family through the difficult transition. Meanwhile, the criminal justice system would be pursuing its own form of healing through accountability. The grandmother and aunt would face their day in court, where prosecutors would lay out the evidence of their crimes and argue for appropriate punishment. The goal wouldn't just be punitive. It would be to send a message that you cannot hide children from their parents without facing serious consequences, that family bonds don't give you the right to break the law, that protecting children means protecting them from illegal abduction, even by relatives. The sentences, if the defendants were convicted, would likely be substantial. This wasn't a brief custody violation that was quickly resolved. This was a sustained, deliberate conspiracy to conceal children for nearly 2 years. That level of premeditation and the duration of the offense would weigh heavily in any sentencing decision. There would be victim impact statements, probably from the mother herself, describing the trauma and anguish of those lost years. There would be consideration of whether the defendants showed remorse or continued to justify their actions. And through it all, there would be the question everyone would be asking. Why? What possessed these family members to do something so hurtful? Was it really about religious belief? Or was there something else? Had there been a custody dispute that preceded the abduction? Was there bad blood between the mother and her own family? Were there allegations or concerns about the mother's parenting that, whether justified or not, led her relatives to take such drastic action? The answers to these questions might emerge during the legal proceedings, or they might remain private family matters never fully revealed to the public. What matters most from a legal standpoint is that whatever the motivation, the actions taken were illegal and harmful. The court's job isn't to adjudicate family disputes or religious beliefs. It's to apply the law to criminal conduct. As word of this case spread, it resonated with other families who had experienced similar tragedies. Support groups for parents of missing children reached out to offer assistance and solidarity. Other victims of family abduction shared their stories, creating a tapestry of similar experiences that highlighted both the commonality of this type of crime and the unique pain each family endures. These support networks serve a vital function, providing emotional support, practical advice, and advocacy for better laws and more resources to address parental abduction. They work to raise awareness that family abduction is not a victimless crime, that it causes profound harm to children and left-behind parents, and that it deserves to be taken seriously by law enforcement and the courts. They also push back against dangerous misconceptions, like the idea that a child is automatically safe because they're with a relative, or that family abductions are less serious than stranger abductions. The trauma of being taken from a parent, of being told lies about that parent, of being kept in an environment of fear and secrecy, can be just as damaging regardless of whether the abductor is a stranger or a grandmother. For the community of Fredonia itself, this case may have prompted some difficult introspection. How had these children been hidden in their midst for so long without anyone reporting it? Were people willfully turning a blind eye, or were they simply unaware? What responsibility does a community have to watch for signs of concealed or abused children? And how do you balance that responsibility with respect for privacy and family autonomy? These are questions without easy answers, but they're important to ask. Communities play a crucial role in child protection. Neighbors, teachers, coaches, store clerks, anyone who interacts with children can be an additional set of eyes watching for signs of trouble. But that only works if people are willing to get involved, to ask questions when something seems off, to report concerns to authorities even when it might strain social relationships. In tight-knit communities, especially those organized around shared religious beliefs, there can be a strong reluctance to report on neighbors or fellow church members. There's a sense that problems should be handled internally, that bringing in outside authorities is a betrayal. But when children's safety is at stake, this code of silence can be deadly. It allows abuse to continue, allows children to be hidden, allows criminals to operate with impunity. Breaking through that culture of silence requires both legal mechanisms, like mandatory reporting laws, and cultural shifts in how communities think about their responsibilities to vulnerable members. It requires teaching people that reporting suspected child abuse or abduction isn't being a busybody or a snitch. It's being a responsible member of society who cares about the welfare of children. As the one-year anniversary of the children's recovery approached, their mother might have reflected on how far they had all come. The nightmares that had plagued her constantly in those first months back together had hopefully become less frequent. The children had perhaps settled into school and made friends, reclaiming pieces of a normal childhood. There was still healing to do, still challenges to face, but they were together. And that was everything. She might have thought about the tipster whose call had made all the difference. Did that person know what their courage had meant? Did they understand that by speaking up, they had reunited a family and possibly saved 3 children from further harm? There's a special kind of heroism in that moment of decision, when someone chooses to get involved even though it would be easier and safer to look the way. She might have thought too about all the other parents out there still searching, still hoping, still refusing to give up on their missing children. Her story had a happy ending, but so many others were still living the nightmare she had endured. What could she do to help them? How could she use her experience to raise awareness, to advocate for better resources, to offer hope to those who desperately needed it? And she undoubtedly thought about her children, about the resilience they had shown, about the strength it took to adapt to their changed circumstances, to rebuild their sense of safety and family. Children are remarkably resilient, but that resilience shouldn't be taken for granted or used as an excuse to minimize the harm that was done to them. They would carry the impact of those lost years for the rest of their lives. But with love and support, they could still thrive. The search for the fugitive father continued, a manhunt that might last months or even years. Every lead would be followed, every sighting investigated, every possible refuge monitored. The determination to bring him to justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring he couldn't take these children again, about giving the family closure and security, about demonstrating that you cannot simply flee from your crimes and expect to never face consequences. When he was eventually caught, if he was caught, there would be another legal proceeding, another opportunity for the truth to come out. He would face charges related to the abduction and concealment, possibly additional charges depending on what else investigators uncovered. His defense attorneys would argue whatever mitigating factors they could find, perhaps claiming he believed he was protecting his children, perhaps negotiating for a plea deal in exchange for information about others who helped him. But whatever happened in court, whatever sentence he might receive, it wouldn't erase the harm he had caused. It wouldn't give back those 2 years he stole from his children's childhood. It wouldn't heal the trauma his actions had inflicted on multiple people. Justice, in the legal sense, important as it is, can never fully repair what has been broken by crimes like these. What it can do is draw a line, establish consequences, and hopefully deter others who might consider similar actions. Every successful prosecution of parental abduction sends a message that these crimes will be pursued, that even family relationships don't provide immunity from the law, that children's rights and welfare matter more than adult desires for control or revenge. This case, like every case of family abduction, is ultimately about power and control, about one person or group deciding they had the right to make unilateral decisions about children's lives, to cut off relationships they deemed unhealthy or sinful, to impose their will regardless of what the law or the children's other parent wanted. It's about the fundamental failure to recognize children as individuals with their own rights, rather than as property to be controlled or prizes to be won. The most important lesson from this story is the one the mother already knew. Never give up hope. For 22 months, many people probably told her to prepare for the worst, to accept that her children might never be found, but she kept searching, kept hoping, kept her children's memory alive. And because she did, because investigators kept working the case, because one person finally spoke up, those 3 children came home. There are other families out there right now going through what she went through. Their children are missing, taken by family members who believe they're above the law, or that their faith justifies their actions. Those families need to know that resolution is possible, that happy endings do happen, that their persistence matters. They need to know that law enforcement takes these cases seriously, that resources exist to help them, that they're not alone in their fight. They also need systemic changes to make these happy endings more common, and to prevent abductions in the first place. Better enforcement of custody orders, more resources for tracking and investigating family abductions, stronger penalties for those who help conceal abducted children, greater oversight of insular communities where abuse and abduction can be hidden. These aren't just abstract policy proposals. They're potentially life-saving interventions that could spare other families the anguish this mother endured. As this story concludes, 3 children are home where they belong. A mother has her babies back. 2 alleged perpetrators are facing justice, and a 3rd is being actively pursued. It's not a perfect ending. The trauma can't be undone. The lost time can't be recovered. But it's an ending where the children are safe, where the truth has come to light, where accountability is being pursued. And maybe, just maybe, this story will inspire someone else in a similar situation to make that crucial phone call, to provide that vital tip, to be the difference between a family reunited and a tragedy that continues indefinitely. Because that's ultimately what broke this case open. One person who saw something wrong and decided to speak up. One person who chose to get involved even when it might have been easier to stay silent. One person whose courage saved 3 children and brought a mother's nightmare to an end. That's the power each of us has. The responsibility we all share to watch out for vulnerable children, to question situations that don't feel right, to report concerns to authorities even when it's uncomfortable, to be the person who makes the difference. Because somewhere right now, a child is being hidden. A parent is desperately searching, and the right tip at the right time could bring them home. The recovery of these 3 children sent ripples through communities far beyond Fredonia, Arizona. News coverage of the case reached parents across the country who had been living their own nightmares, searching for their own missing children. Support groups saw an uptick in calls from desperate mothers and fathers, some seeking advice on how to keep their own searches alive. Others sharing stories that had never made national headlines, but were no less devastating. One of the most haunting aspects of family abduction cases is how they shatter fundamental assumptions about the world. We teach our children to beware of strangers, to never get into cars with people they don't know, to scream and run if someone tries to take them. But what do you tell them when the danger comes from within their own family? How do you prepare a child for the possibility that someone they love and trust might take them away from their other parent? The psychological complexity of these situations cannot be overstated. Unlike stranger abductions, where the victim can clearly identify themselves as being held against their will, children taken by family members often don't understand they've been abducted. They may believe the stories they're told about why they can't see their other parent. They may develop loyalty to their abductor, especially if that person is someone they previously had a loving relationship with. They may even resist rescue attempts, having been convinced that the searching parent is the dangerous one. This was likely the case with these 3 children during at least part of their time in hiding. Imagine being told, day after day, that your mother is evil, that she's trying to hurt you, that staying hidden is the only way to keep safe. Imagine having those messages reinforced by multiple adults you trust, all presenting a united front. For young children who don't have the cognitive tools to question what they're being told, these lies can become their reality. The process of deprogramming, of helping children understand the truth of what happened to them, has to be handled with extraordinary care. You can't just tell a child that their grandmother and aunt and father are bad people who lied to them. That creates a different kind of trauma, a sense that they can't trust anyone, that the world is full of deception. Instead, skilled therapists work gradually, helping children process their experiences at their own pace, validating their feelings while gently introducing alternative perspectives. For this mother, watching her children struggle with these confusing emotions must have been agonizing. There might have been moments when they rejected her, when they asked to go back to their grandmother, when they seemed to believe the lies they had been told. She would have had to summon incredible patience and grace, continuing to love and support her children even as they processed feelings they didn't fully understand, even as they sometimes directed anger at her that rightfully belonged elsewhere. She would have needed help herself, therapy to process her own trauma, support groups where she could talk to other parents who understood what she was going through. The weight of being the stable, consistent, loving presence her children needed while dealing with her own pain and anger would have been crushing at times. There would have been moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she was doing enough, saying the right things, handling situations correctly. But she was there. That's what mattered most. She was there every morning when they woke up and every night when they went to sleep. She was there for homework struggles and bad dreams and ordinary moments of childhood. She was there, proving through her presence and consistency that she was never the person they had been told to fear, that her love for them had never wavered, that they were safe with her. The grandmother and aunt, sitting in jail cells awaiting trial, may have had their own moments of reckoning. Did they believe they had done the right thing? Did they feel any remorse for the pain they had caused? Or were they convinced, even in the face of criminal charges, that they had been following some higher calling that justified their actions? In many cases, involving FLDS members, or those influenced by similar fundamentalist groups, there's a genuine belief that secular law is subordinate to divine law. They see themselves not as criminals, but as faithful servants protecting children from what they perceive as spiritual danger. This mindset makes it very difficult to reach them, to help them understand the harm they've caused, because in their worldview, that harm is justified or even necessary. Court-appointed psychologists would likely evaluate both women, trying to determine their mental state, their understanding of right and wrong, their likelihood of reoffending. These evaluations would help inform sentencing decisions, but they would also provide insights into how best to prevent similar crimes in the future. Understanding the psychology of family abductors, their motivations and rationalizations, is crucial for developing effective interventions and prevention strategies. The legal proceedings would unfold slowly, as these things do. Preliminary hearings, evidence disclosure, possible plea negotiation, all while the defendants sat in custody or perhaps were released on bail with strict conditions. The mother would likely attend these proceedings, wanting to look the people who took her children in the eye, wanting them to see the face of the person they had wronged. Her presence in that courtroom would be a form of reclaiming power, of refusing to be erased or forgotten the way they had tried to erase her from her children's lives. Victim impact statements, when the time came, would give her the opportunity to speak directly to the court about what she and her children had endured. She could describe the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the way every phone call made her heart race with hope and fear. She could talk about her children's struggles to readjust, about the therapy sessions and behavioral challenges, about all the little moments she had missed during those stolen years. First words, first steps, ordinary childhood milestones that she could never get back. She could also speak to the ongoing impact, the ways this crime would continue to affect her family for years to come, the security measures they still had to take, the fear that the fugitive father might try to take the children again, the difficulty her children had trusting other family members after being betrayed by their own relatives, the financial burden of therapy and legal fees and everything else associated with recovering from such a trauma. And she could speak to what justice would mean to her. Not just punishment for the sake of punishment, but accountability, recognition of the wrong that was done, and measures to ensure it couldn't happen again. She might ask for the maximum sentence allowed by law, or she might advocate for sentences that included mandatory therapy and rehabilitation. What she wanted, more than anything, was probably for these women to truly understand what they had done, to feel genuine remorse, to acknowledge that their actions, whatever their motivations, had caused profound harm. The judge would listen to all of this, along with testimony from the defendants and their attorneys, character witnesses, expert opinions, all the components that go into a sentencing decision. The judge would have to balance multiple factors: the seriousness of the crime, the defendants' criminal histories or lack thereof, their level of remorse, the needs of the victims, and the interests of justice and public safety. Sentencing in family abduction cases can vary widely depending on jurisdiction and circumstances. Some defendants receive relatively light sentences, especially if it's a first offense, and there are mitigating factors. Others face decades in prison, particularly in cases involving long-term concealment or evidence of additional abuse. The fact that this case lasted nearly 2 years, involved multiple defendants working together, and potentially involved connection to a group with a history of serious abuses would all weigh toward a harsher sentence. But whatever sentences were handed down, they wouldn't feel adequate to the mother who had suffered so profoundly. How do you put a price on 2 years of your children's lives? How many years in prison equals the anguish of not knowing if your kids were alive or dead? How do you quantify the harm done to children who were deliberately turned against their parent? The truth is, you can't. The legal system does its best to impose proportional consequences, but it can never truly balance the scales. Meanwhile, the search for the father intensified. Every day he remained free was another day the family couldn't feel completely safe. Another day he could potentially be planning another abduction. Law enforcement used every tool at their disposal: tracking financial records, monitoring known associates, checking border crossings, coordinating with other agencies. They released his photo to the media, asked the public for tips, offered rewards for information leading to his capture. In cases where FLDS connections are suspected, investigators also work with former members of the church who might have information about safe houses or hiding places used by members on the run. These former members, having escaped the church themselves, often want to help protect others from the harm they experienced. They can provide invaluable insights into how the church operates, how it moves people around, how it maintains its wall of secrecy. But even with all these resources, finding one person who doesn't want to be found is extraordinarily difficult. If he had help from a network of FLDS members, he could move from place to place, never staying long enough to establish a pattern. He could have access to false identification documents, to cash that couldn't be traced, to communities that would hide him without question. He could, potentially, stay free for years. This reality weighed heavily on the mother and her children. Every time the doorbell rang unexpectedly, every unfamiliar car on their street, every moment when the children were out of her sight could trigger anxiety. They might have had to change their routines, vary their routes, always be aware of their surroundings. The children might have had code words to use if someone approached them claiming to be sent by their mother. They might have had to practice what to do if they saw their father, how to get to safety, who to call. Living under this kind of stress takes a toll. It's hard to relax, hard to enjoy ordinary moments when you're constantly vigilant. It can lead to hypervigilance in the children, to anxiety disorders, to difficulty trusting new people or situations. The mother would have had to walk a difficult line, teaching her children to be appropriately cautious without making them paranoid, helping them reclaim a sense of normalcy while still protecting them from a very real threat. School would have presented its own challenges. The children would have needed special considerations from teachers and administrators who understood their situation. They might have struggled academically, having missed substantial time or having received inadequate education during their time in hiding. They might have had behavioral issues as they processed their trauma. They might have had difficulty making friends or trusting authority figures. But school could also be healing. It could provide structure and routine, opportunities for achievement and social connection, a place where they were just regular kids doing regular kid things. Good teachers, informed about the children's background and trained in trauma-informed practices, could make an enormous difference in their recovery. Art therapy, music, sports, all the activities that help children express themselves and build confidence could be part of their healing process. The mother would have attended countless meetings with school personnel, advocating for her children's needs, ensuring they had appropriate support services, making sure that information about their situation was shared only on a need-to-know basis to protect their privacy. She would have had to be vigilant about school security, making sure that only authorized people could pick up the children, that the school had photos of the father and knew he was not to have any contact. She would have faced financial pressures too, legal fees from both the criminal case and any related family law proceedings, therapy costs that might not be fully covered by insurance, possibly lost income if she had to take time off work to deal with all the appointments and complications, the expenses associated with enhanced security measures for their home and family. All of this on top of the regular costs of raising 3 children. There might have been compensation available through victim services programs, funds specifically designated to help crime victims with expenses related to their victimization. But these programs often have limitations on what they'll cover and how much they'll provide. There might have been civil legal options too, suing the grandmother and aunt for damages, though collecting a judgment from defendants who might themselves be financially limited could be difficult. Friends and community members probably rallied around the family, offering support in various forms: meal trains to help with daily tasks, fundraisers to offset expenses, offers to babysit or help with errands. These gestures of kindness, while they couldn't fix everything, would have reminded the mother that she wasn't alone, that people cared, that there was goodness in the world alongside the darkness she had experienced. Religious communities, if the mother was part of one, might have provided spiritual support and a sense of belonging. This could be complicated if there were concerns about fundamentalist influences, but mainstream religious communities often rally around families in crisis, providing both practical help and emotional, spiritual support. Prayer groups, support circles, pastoral counseling, all could have played a role in the family's healing. The wider community's response to cases like this often includes soul-searching about what could have been done differently. Were there warning signs that were missed? Were there opportunities to intervene earlier? What can be learned to prevent similar situations in the future? These questions aren't about assigning blame, but about improving systems and awareness so that other children can be protected. Local media coverage of the case would have raised awareness about family abduction as an issue, potentially inspiring people to be more vigilant, to report concerns, to understand that children being kept isolated might not be there voluntarily. It might have prompted schools and community organizations to review their protocols for identifying and reporting potential abduction situations. It might have encouraged legislators to look at whether current laws and resources were adequate. National media attention, if the case received it, could amplify these effects even further. Stories like this, when they break through the noise of the daily news cycle, can shift public consciousness, making people aware of issues they hadn't previously considered. They can put pressure on policymakers to act, on law enforcement to prioritize these cases, on communities to take responsibility for protecting vulnerable members. But media attention is a double-edged sword. While it can be helpful in generating leads and raising awareness, it can also be intrusive and traumatizing for the family at the center of the story. Reporters camped outside the house, requests for interviews at a time when the family just wanted privacy to heal, speculation and commentary from people who didn't know the full story. All of this could add to the family's stress. The mother would have had to make difficult decisions about how much to engage with media, whether to tell her story publicly in hopes of helping others, or to guard her family's privacy fiercely. There's no right answer to these questions. Each family has to make the choice that's best for their particular situation. Some choose to become advocates, using their experience to push for change. Others retreat from the spotlight, focusing inward on their own healing. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The immediate crisis had passed. The children were home, but the work of healing continued. Therapy sessions became a regular part of the family's routine. The children made progress, slowly learning to trust again, to believe that this stability would last, that they wouldn't be taken away again. There were setbacks, hard days when old fears resurfaced or new challenges emerged. But overall, the trend was positive. The mother watched her children laugh, really laugh, in a way they hadn't in those first months after their return. She saw them make friends, excel at school, develop interests and hobbies. She saw them becoming themselves again, or perhaps becoming themselves for the first time, if they had been too young to have strong identities before the abduction. These moments of normalcy, of ordinary childhood joy, were victories won through tremendous effort and resilience. She herself was changing too, healing in her own way. The constant state of crisis she had lived in for 2 years, followed by the intense stress of the reunion and recovery period, had taken a toll that couldn't be ignored. She had to learn to relax again, to trust that her children were safe, to not jump at every sound. She had to process her own trauma, her own anger and grief, separate from her role as her children's support system. Forgiveness was complicated. How do you forgive family members who stole 2 years of your life, who put you through unimaginable anguish, who potentially harmed your children psychologically? Some people find that forgiveness is essential to their own healing, that holding on to anger only hurts themselves. Others feel that forgiveness would minimize what was done to them, that justice and accountability are more important than letting go. There's no right way to feel, no obligation to forgive people who have profoundly wronged you. What the mother did have to find was a way to move forward, not to forget what happened or pretend it didn't matter, but to not let it consume the rest of her life or her children's lives, to build a future that was about more than just surviving trauma, that included joy and hope and possibilities. That was perhaps the hardest work of all, creating something new rather than just trying to return to what was before, because what was before was gone forever. The children asked questions as they got older, questions about why they had been taken, about what their father and grandmother and aunt had been thinking, about whether they were bad people, or if they had loved the children in their own way. These questions didn't have simple answers. The mother had to find ways to be honest about what happened, while not making the children feel guilty for any positive feelings they might have had toward their abductors, while not teaching them that love justifies harmful actions. She might have said something like, "Sometimes people who love us make very bad choices. They convince themselves they're doing the right thing when they're actually causing harm. The people who took you probably thought they were helping you, but they were wrong. What they did was wrong, even if they didn't see it that way. And nothing, not love or religion or good intentions, makes it okay to take children away from their parent and hide them." These conversations would evolve as the children matured and could handle more complex ideas. When they were young, simple explanations focused on right and wrong. As they grew older, they could begin to grapple with the nuances, the psychology of their abductors, the role of religious extremism, the ways that people can be simultaneously victims and perpetrators. Understanding these complexities could help the children make sense of their experiences and develop their own frameworks for understanding human behavior and morality. Holidays and birthdays had their own complications. These should have been times of celebration, but they were also reminders of time lost, of celebrations that had been missed. The first Christmas after the children's return might have been bittersweet, joyful to be together, but painful to think about the 2 Christmases spent apart. The mother might have tried to recreate missed celebrations, to have belated birthday parties for the birthdays she couldn't celebrate when the children were gone, to fill photo albums with new memories to replace the ones she never got to make. She might have also struggled with what to do about the grandmother and aunt, how to explain to the children why they couldn't see these relatives who they had lived with and might have bonded with during their time away. This was different from explaining about their father who had actively taken them. The grandmother and aunt might have been more nurturing in their day-to-day interactions, even as they participated in hiding the children. The cognitive dissonance of someone being kind to you while also harming you in fundamental ways is difficult for adults to process, let alone children. Over time, patterns emerged. Certain triggers would provoke anxiety or behavioral issues in the children. Certain times of year were harder than others. Certain situations reminded them of their time away. The mother and the children's therapists learned to recognize these patterns and develop coping strategies. The children learned to identify their own feelings and ask for help when they needed it. They learned that feeling scared or angry or confused was okay, that they could talk about those feelings instead of acting them out. The family developed their own rituals and traditions, ways of marking time and creating positive associations, weekly movie nights, annual vacation trips, special ways of celebrating achievements both big and small. These created new memories, positive experiences that could coexist with a difficult past. They built a sense of family identity that wasn't defined solely by what had happened to them, but included who they were choosing to become. As the legal case against the grandmother and aunt moved toward resolution, whether through plea agreements or trials, the mother had to decide how involved she wanted to be in that process. Did she want to attend every hearing? Did she want to prepare and deliver a victim impact statement? Did she want to know details of what was said in court? Or would that be re-traumatizing? There was no guidebook for these decisions, just her own instincts about what she and her children needed. If the case went to trial, it would mean reliving the trauma publicly, having defense attorneys question her account of events, possibly having her fitness as a parent called into question as part of the defense strategy. This is a common and cruel tactic in family abduction cases. Blame the searching parent, suggest they were the problem, imply the abduction was somehow justified. She would have to be prepared for this, to have her own attorney present, to maintain her composure even when it felt like the legal system was re-victimizing her. Alternatively, if plea deals were offered and accepted, she would have to grapple with whether the sentences seemed adequate, whether justice was being served, or if the defendants were getting off too lightly. She might feel frustrated that there wouldn't be a trial where all the facts came out publicly, where the defendants had to face cross-examination and accountability. Or she might feel relieved that her children wouldn't have to go through the ordeal of a trial, that resolution came more quickly through negotiation. These are the impossible choices that crime victims face, choosing between options that all have significant downsides, trying to make the best decision with incomplete information about how each path will unfold. The mother would have consulted with prosecutors, with her own attorney if she had one, with victim advocates, but ultimately the decision about how to proceed would weigh heavily on her. This case is closed, the children safe, the family reunited and healing, but the fight against parental abduction continues. And every case solved, every child recovered, every family reunited reminds us why that fight matters. It matters because children matter. It matters because families matter. It matters because justice matters. It matters because somewhere right now, another parent is frantically searching. Another set of children is being hidden. Another family is being torn apart. And it matters because hope, even in the darkest circumstances, is never truly lost. As long as people keep searching, keep caring, keep speaking up when they see something wrong, there's always a chance for stories like this to end with 3 children coming home.